Tonight, Dorian's office door stands ajar, a thin line of light across the carpet calling my name. I shouldn't be here after hours, not with the storm building over Boston and the storm inside me. One confession could change everything: promotion, reputation, friendship, maybe even save us. Or burn it all down. I rested my fingertips against the frame and watched the rain pour through the high windows like a quiet wall of silver. Our floor was always too cold at night, the kind of air that made your voice sound smaller, but his light was warm, the color of maple syrup. I could see his desk just beyond the blinds, the corner with the plant he never remembered to water, the stack of papers that never seemed to shrink, the framed photo of his father shaking hands with him when he started this job. The screen of my phone went dark in my palm. 57 minutes past 8. The building hummed with its own electricity, and somewhere the elevator cables whispered. I had planned to leave at 6 on the dot. I'd planned to walk home along the river, past the couples and the dog walkers and the joggers whose breath turned white in the air. Instead, I was here late enough that the city felt like it had closed its eyes, thinking about all the things I should not say to the man who signed my performance reviews, the man whose laughter went straight through the armor I had spent years building. My manager, my center of gravity. My storm, Tom! Dorian's voice carried from inside, even and low. I can hear you breathing, you know. There was the old tease in it, the one that kept me human on the days when numbers and projections turned me into a machine. I pushed the door open another inch and stepped into the light. I came by to drop off the revised audit memo, I said, holding up the folder as proof of virtue. It wasn't a lie. I had worked on it until my eyes stung. Didn't want it to get lost in your inbox. He leaned back in his chair and smiled in that careful please-come-in way he used with clients and new hires. A few strands of grey had arrived at his temples this year and were particularly defiant tonight, pointing every which way. He had rolled his sleeves to his elbows, and there was a smudge of ink along the blade of his thumb. He had a way of being meticulous everywhere, except where it didn't matter, and somehow it always mattered to me. You didn't need to bring it up, he said, but thank you. It'll help to have it in the morning. You look like you need a towel and a coffee. I look like that most days, I said. He laughed again, softer now, and something in my chest woke up like a bird. The first time I had heard that laugh, I'd been sitting across from him as a new hire, pretending my hands weren't sweating into the paper cup of coffee he'd insisted on getting for me. You try the maple scones downstairs yet? He'd asked then, earnest. They're ridiculous. Don't ask me about the calories. I didn't come by to talk scones, I said now, before courage could leak out of me. Do you have a minute? He looked at me for a beat longer than usual, and the office seemed to narrow and widen at the same time. Outside, thunder rolled so low I felt it in my throat. For you, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Always. That was the trouble. For me, always. How do you fall in love at 50 when you have learned the rules the hard way and you know how easily they break? How do you fall in love with the person who decides whether you get a raise, who approves your vacation time, who looks out for you because that is what he does for his team, and who looks at you, sometimes like you are more than a line item? How do you walk in to say the thing you've never said aloud outside your own kitchen and not set a spark to all of it? I sat. The leather creaked politely beneath me, as if asking us both to be very sure. I think we need to talk about the reorg rumors, I tried, the safe second topic. People are worried. His mouth tightened at the corners. We'd gotten the first whisper on Wednesday that the parent company down in Connecticut was floating a new alignment. I'd watched heads bend together in the break room, watched Slack sprout threads like vines, each rumor knotted with another. My own team had gone quiet with a fear I recognized, the fear of being chosen and the fear of not being chosen. Two sides of the same coin. People are always worried, Dorian said, but gently. He knew better than anyone where worry lived in this building. It camped by the windows. It filed itself into cabinets. I've reached out to Priya and Martin, he continued, naming HR and our director. I'll share what I can when I can. Transparency, right? Even when it's hard. You're good at hard, I said. then blushed at my own phrasing and looked out at the rain. "What I mean is, you're good at the hard conversations. So are you." He said it without ceremony, as if naming a weather pattern. Then he leaned forward, hands steepled, his gaze steady. "Tom, what's really on your mind?" "Everything and nothing. The way your hand touched the small of my back when you introduced me to the CFO at the holiday party. The way you texted me after my mother's fall last summer and told me to leave early, that the deck could wait, that I was not a machine. The way you put your glasses on when you read contracts, as if you couldn't quite believe words would do what they said. The way the office grew around you, in fits and starts until it felt like a place I could stay. The way, when I laughed too loudly in a town hall meeting at a joke that wasn't that funny, you flashed a quick grin and looked down to hide it, and I felt like I had built the bridge we were standing on. A part of me wanted to run. Older men like me are good at running because we have had practice. We run to keep our hearts safe. We run because we learn that a wrong step at work can echo through a decade. I'd once run out of a therapist's office when he said the word closet, like it was a coat you could shrug off. I'd once run to a new marriage without knowing I wasn't finished with the old dreams I'd had. I didn't want to run anymore. I can't keep reading between the lines, I said. Not about work. Not about anything else. Lightning flared against the windows like a photographer's bulb. In the electric afterimage, I saw his face change, not into someone else, but into someone who had stopped pretending. Dorian was always composed. It's what made clients trust him. Even now, his shoulders were square and his shirt was crisp and the edges of his files lined up with the desk's edge. But composure can be a kind of mercy or a kind of armor. And I knew which it had been lately. "Tom," he said, and then stopped. And the silence between us filled with everything he had meant not to say. Sometimes it helps to go back to the beginning. It helps to remember that my first day here wasn't cinematic. It was a Tuesday, and my key fob didn't work, and the young man at the front desk couldn't figure out why. I stood in the lobby while a parade of people in better suits and smarter shoes swiped in and smiled. When Dorian came down to rescue me, he made a joke about corporate mazes and told me the weather report as if he'd been practicing being reassuring all his life. He walked just half a step slower than me all the way to the elevator. I remember thinking it would be nice to walk with someone who noticed your pace. He noticed everything. 3 weeks in, he noticed my habit of pausing before speaking in meetings, of counting to 3, because if I didn't, my words would come out more jagged than I liked. He noticed the way I sat, with a hand on my chest when I was tired, as if steadying something inside. He noticed that I took my coffee black on Mondays and sweet on Fridays, which he said was an act of mercy on myself that he respected. I noticed things too, that he never raised his voice even when the client was impossible, that he took the longest stretch of the walk back from lunch facing the street so the wind would hit him and not me, that he asked new interns where they were from and which bus took them home. He was my manager. He was also a brown-eyed man who liked old jazz and dull knives. He tucked a paring knife into the break-room drawer once, and when I teased him, he delivered a lecture on proper blade care as if my life depended on it. He had an unastonishing car that he loved, and an apartment he clearly did not, a collection of dog-eared cookbooks, a tense relationship with a neighbor named Al, who borrowed tools and never returned them. He was the person who would knock on your door when a storm was coming and ask if you were stocked up on batteries. He was the storm and the knock. "What do you want me to say?" he asked now, voice still low but with an edge I had never heard on me. He looked tired in a way he did not show to our director or our clients. This was the tired of living in an office where you were expected to be everyone's parent and friend, and police officer and saint. Because I know what the policy says. I can recite it backward. And I know what the heart says, which is less clear and more demanding. The policy says managers can't be in a relationship with their direct reports, I said, keeping my voice steady. Because if one of us didn't, the room might tilt. It also says transfers can be requested for personal reasons, and if HR approves, a consensual relationship agreement can be filed. I've read it too. He smiled for real then, a crooked thing that made him look a decade younger. Of course you did. Of course you did the homework. I'm too old not to. We were quiet again. The rain slowed and turned to a softer percussion. The city remembered it was a city, and somewhere a siren chased itself into the night. I'm not asking you to risk anything you don't want to risk, I said. I'm not even asking you to tell me if you feel what I feel. I'm telling you that I can't pretend you are just my manager anymore. It doesn't work inside my head. It doesn't match the way my hands shake when you're near, or the way my day changes when you laugh. I can handle the work. I can handle the policy. I can handle the waiting if that's what it takes. But I can't handle the pretending. The desk between us felt both too big and too small. He placed his hand on it, palm down, not reaching and not retreating. His ring finger had a pale line where a ring had once been. He had never told me that story. I had not asked. We were two men being careful in a world that had not always been careful with us. I feel it, he said. The words were plain and solid in the air, as if he were reading an address off a piece of mail. I closed my eyes and imagined laying those words into a drawer and opening it when I was afraid. I feel it, he said again, softer, as if fearing I hadn't heard him the first time. And I have felt it for longer than I should have. I thought it was a phase, like my love for those terrible maple scones. They're not terrible, I said, smiling even as something inside me stung in the best way. They're honest. And sticky, like us. I laughed then, and the sound startled a crow off the ledge of the window. He ran a hand over his face and let it drop slowly, as if he were lowering a curtain. Okay, he said. If we do this, and I think you know that if is a courtesy, then we do it clean. No secrets, no backstairs. We go to HR in the morning and we tell them. We request the transfer. If they say wait, we wait. And in the meantime, we hold the line. Hold the line, I repeated, liking the way it felt in my mouth. It sounded like the instructions on a map. Do not lose yourself, just because the road curves. Can you do that? He asked. I can try, I said, because that word had grown more beautiful to me with age. When I was 25, try sounded weak. Now it sounded like courage. I can try as hard as I ever have. He stood and I stood too, because listening to him while he stood felt strange. We were so close then that I could see the small scar under his chin, the one that looked like a comma. He'd told me he'd gotten it when he was 11. Falling off a bike his father insisted he could ride without training wheels. He'd kept the scar because he liked that it forced him to pause, or so he claimed. He lifted a hand and stopped it halfway to my shoulder. You and me, he said, we're not a mistake, but we will be if we are careless. Careful, I said. We can be careful. He nodded once. Outside, a car hissed by, its tires kissing wet pavement. He placed his hand on the back of my chair instead of on me, a small rearrangement of desire into discipline. Then he smiled, and even his restraint felt like a kind of affection. Get home safe, Tom. You too. I wanted to kiss him. I had waited so long in my life to want someone with my whole self that the wanting felt like a bell ringing in every bone. But there are moments when the best version of yourself carries you past what you want and sets you down gently on the other side. And this was one of them. I picked up my battered briefcase, and when I left his office, I did not look back. The morning found me meaner than I intended. That's the only way to say it. I snapped at a printer that didn't deserve it and frowned at a colleague as if she'd personally invented delays. I thought of texting Dorian and telling him I was still in, that last night was not a fever dream, but we had agreed that until we spoke with HR, we would behave like adults who could handle their own hearts. I drank my black coffee, then my sweet coffee, and hoped the mix would neutralize me into decency. By 10, the rumors had solidified into a memo with a bland subject line. Departments would be realigned over the next quarter. Managers would be asked to submit recommendations for team structures by the end of the month. The words looked harmless, but around them the air buzzed like a live wire. I watched as someone in marketing wiped away tears. I watched a consultant I barely knew buy 3 muffins from the kiosk downstairs and hand one to the security guard. Everyone had their rituals. Mine was making lists. At 11, Dorian pinged me. HR at noon. Bring your charming self. Also, bring your ID. Priya's a stickler. We did not walk together to HR. He left first. I waited 7 minutes. In the elevator, 2 legal associates murmured about tennis. The doors opened onto the carpet I had always thought looked like oatmeal. Priya's office was at the far end, glass on 2 sides, and a plant so healthy I doubted it was real. She greeted us with a smile that reached her eyes and a pen that clicked twice. What can I do for my favorite troublemakers? She said. She'd said that to me when I asked too many follow-up questions during benefits orientation. She said it now with a lift to her eyebrows that took the sting out of the word. Dorian did not hesitate. We are here to request a transfer for Tom, he said, and to file a consensual relationship disclosure, pending that transfer's approval. Priya clicked her pen again, then set it down more gently than necessary. Okay, she said. Let me say 2 things up front. 1, I appreciate you both coming to me now and not later. It makes all the difference. 2, the reorg complicates everything. Not in a doomed way, she added quickly, seeing my face do something unhelpful. But in a timing way. What kind of timing, I asked. Being 50 does not mean you stop disliking surprises. If we approve a transfer now and the reorg moves your role under Dorian again in 2 weeks, we've solved nothing, she said. We need to know, at least in broad strokes, where positions will land. That's a matter of weeks, not months. Can you wait that long? Dorian looked at me, not in a way that pushed the decision at me, but in a way that reminded me I was not being asked to wait alone. I thought of the word I'd said last night, try. Yes, I said. We can wait. Priya nodded and opened a drawer. I'll email you the disclosure form. You'll fill it, but not submit until the transfer is approved. In the meantime, I'll ask you to formalize a few boundaries. No one-on-one closed-door meetings unless another party is present or the door is open. No off-hours communications unless it's an emergency or work critical. No written declarations of undying affection over corporate channels. She smiled to soften that, but the point landed. And Dorian, I'll need you to document all performance-related feedback for Tom with another manager copied. It's clunky, but it protects everyone. I felt something inside me stand a little taller. A younger me would have heard bureaucracy. This me heard a path. We can do clunky, I said. Clunky is honest. Good, she said. And this is not policy, just human. Be kind to yourselves in the waiting. Sometimes the waiting is what makes the thing real. My grandmother says that. She was never wrong. We left with a list and a little hope. I held the elevator button longer than necessary, just to have something to do with my hands. Beside me, Dorian was all forward motion and quiet breath. Lunch? He asked, then shook his head. No, that falls under the new rules. Door open, I said. We could eat with the door open. He looked at me as if I were a glass of water after a long walk. Okay, he said. Door open. We ate turkey sandwiches in his office with the door open wide enough to drive a forklift through. We talked about nothing and everything, the merits of whole grain mustard, the new intern who had accidentally sent an email to the entire company and survived, the song that had been stuck in his head since morning. We did not talk about the way the late sun made his eyes look lighter. We did not talk about the fact that my hand wanted to reach out and touch the inside of his wrist, where his pulse beat steady. We were careful. It felt like tenderness. The world did not care about our carefulness. 2 days later, the CFO decided the audit-ready date was moving up by a week. 3 days after that, a client sent a set of revisions so contradictory that if you followed them, you'd end up back where you started. People raised their voices in the hall for the first time in months. I broke my rule and worked past 9 twice. On the second night, as I packed up in the empty floor, my phone vibrated with an unknown number. Tom. The voice was warm and familiar and took me a second to place. Caroline, I said, smiling despite the hour. My daughter did not call often. Her life in Chicago moved fast. But when she did, she made time fold. Everything okay? Everything's fine, she said. I just found something, going through old boxes. A letter you wrote me when I was 12. I sat back down. My legs didn't feel like mine for a moment. I don't remember that. You probably wrote 100 things like it, she said. This one says, it says you were proud of how I liked to build forts, that you liked that I invited everyone into them, that I had a fortress heart but an unlocked door. I remember the fort phase, I said, smiling. We went through a lot of blankets. She was quiet. I heard the city in her silence, ambulance and laughter. I read it, she said. I cried a little because I'm my mother's child. And then I thought, I want that for you too. I know you didn't have it when I was a kid, but I want it for you now. The line went fuzzy for a heartbeat, and I had to clear my throat. I'm trying, I said. I know, she said. I can hear it. I can hear it in your voice when you talk about work lately. There's someone there you like. I don't need to know the details. I just wanted to say that it's okay to build a fort and ask them in. I had not told her about Dorian, not because I didn't trust her, but because the thing felt too tender to expose to the wind. But her words soothed a place in me I hadn't even known needed it. Thank you, I said. You're a good person, you know that. I learned from a man who made good sandwiches and always had a book in the car, she said. I'll let you sleep. After we hung up, I sat in the afterglow of being loved by someone who had known me before I knew myself. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a person's heart sound louder. I thought about walking down to Dorian's office and standing in the doorway with both hands on the frame and telling him about the letter, about forts and doors, and the fact that my daughter knew without knowing. But I respected the line we'd drawn. Instead, I sent him one text, "Good night, manager. I gave the copier a pep talk today. It appreciates me now." He replied a minute later, "Good night, Tom. Thank you for single-handedly improving office morale. Sleep." We did not sleep well that week. It wasn't just us. The whole floor had a pallor that said everyone's brains were working overtime. On Friday, Dorian and I were in an all-hands when the storm blew back. It was the kind of storm that makes people change plans, heavy, certain, loud. Lightning walked over the city like it was counting steps. We watched raindrops streak down the windows in the conference room and joked about needing boats to get home. When the meeting ended, the emergency lights flickered along the hallway. The building intercom crackled and announced that the elevators were temporarily paused. "Stairs," Dorian said, and held the door open for people as they went past. He always did that. He could have been first. He chose to be last. By the time we reached the 9th floor landing, the motion sensors decided we were shadows and not people. The lights went out for a second, as complete as a held breath. Someone laughed. Someone swore. We waited, hands on the rail, until the glow returned in weak increments. "Everyone okay?" He called down the stairwell, and a chorus of voices replied that we were fine. On the 3rd floor, a small knot had formed at the turn where the wall jutted. A woman from compliance was bent over, hands on her knees, trying to breathe through a panic that had found her in the half-dark. "I'm sorry," she kept saying to the carpet. "I'm so sorry." Dorian crouched in front of her without touching her. "Emma," he said softly. He knew everybody's names. "You're okay. We're all here. Look at me." She did, eyes wide and wet, a bird in a house that had forgotten how to find the door. "Can we sit?" he asked, gesturing to the step above his. And she nodded and sat. And then he told her a story about a time he'd gotten stuck in a hospital elevator for 20 minutes with a delivery nurse and a man singing Sinatra to keep his own wife calm. And by the time he reached the part where the nurse was fan-waving a magazine like a Queen's Guard, Emma had begun to smile. We moved again. When we reached the lobby, I felt a non-specific gratitude for the muscles that let me put one foot in front of the other. He walked me out under the building's overhang. Rain was sheeting down hard enough to blur the streetlights. "You taking the tea?" he asked, voice raised over the water. "I think I'll walk," I said. "It's honest weather." He laughed, then sobered. We were inches apart, but not in a protective way. We were inches apart in the way of two men who knew how to stay on the right side of the line until the line moved. He lifted a hand as if to touch my face and then let it drop without making it look like a drop. "Text me when you're home," he said. "I will." I was soaked through in blocks. Boston in a storm smells like pennies and paper. I moved down side streets where the water ran like small rivers. I passed a pizza place where two teenagers were flirting, faces backlit by neon. My phone buzzed twice. Caroline, pictures of her cat. My sister, a recipe. And then, as I waited under a red light that was turning the rain into rubies, Dorian, Priya needs to meet Monday. Plan on 9. I sent a small thumbs up and tucked the phone away and put my head down and walked. On Monday, the building smelled like coffee and damp wool. Priya had her pen already in her hand when we arrived. "Good news and not as good news," she said. "Good news, we have a preliminary reorg outline. Not as good. The transfer we'd imagined isn't available because that team's moving under your umbrella, Dorian. But there's an opening in analytics under Sarah Kim. It's adjacent to what you do now, Tom. It's not a demotion, but it's different. Different wasn't bad. Different meant breathing in another way. I thought about my mind, the parts of it that liked puzzles and patterns. I thought about the kind of work that felt like stitching a quilt and the kind that felt like laying out a map and figuring out where the highways bothered each other. Analytics could be a place where things lined up. Would Sarah want me? I asked. "She'd be lucky to have you," Dorian said, and the quick warmth of pride in his voice made me straighten. Priya smiled. "Also, Sarah owes me a favor," she said. "We can make this work. We'll need to do some paperwork ballet, and you'll both need to behave in the interim. But if you're willing, we can move on it by month's end. It is a strange sensation to have a professional decision sit alongside a personal one, and for both to feel like the same kind of hope." I looked at Dorian. He did not perform anything with his face. No nods, no brave expressions. He just waited, hands folded, giving me space to be a person and not a decision tree. "I'm willing," I said. "We left HR with the feeling you have after a doctor tells you the plan. Not cured, not over, but less lost." For the rest of the week, I woke before my alarm and sat at my small kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down the edges of the work I would hand over if the transfer went through. I made columns. I labeled things with big looping letters I hadn't used since grade school. I made French toast and buttered it like I loved somebody. I took an old letter out of a box and read it, and when I got to the part about the unlocked door, I found myself saying aloud, "Okay." It felt like naming the weather. The waiting had teeth. People whispered. Someone asked me if I was jumping ship. Someone asked me if I had offended Dorian. Someone asked me if I was sick. I smiled and said I was trying something new. "At your age?" A colleague said, eyebrows up, only half teasing. "At any age," I said. My heart said it too, quietly but firmly. Saturday, I walked down to the river and held a coffee between my palms, like warmth was a thing you could sip. The city had stretched out and relaxed, the way cities do on weekends when the pressure changes. Dorian texted a picture of his kitchen counter covered in flour. Nailed the biscuit recipe. The biscuits looked misshapen and perfect in a way that made my mouth water. I sent a photo back of my coffee and the river and the date on my paper. He texted, "River looks honest today." I replied, "It does." He sent a heart, small and red, which our rules did not explicitly forbid, but also did not encourage. It felt like a note passed in 7th grade, folded twice into a rectangle. On Monday morning of the 4th week, at 8:14 a.m., I became the second person to know I had got the transfer. The first person was Priya, who came by my desk with a real smile and a form like a blessing. "Congratulations," she said. "Happy chart-making." I wanted to run to Dorian's office like a teenager, but I walked, carrying my body like gratitude. His door was open. He was on the phone, speaking in a tone that made the other person, whoever they were, want to help him. He looked at me and I raised the paper like a flag. He nodded once and held up one finger, and then he said into the phone, "Let's circle back this afternoon." "Thank you." He hung up and stood. "We did it," he said. "We did it," I said. And then we both realized we were suddenly two men in a public office who could go from careful to different. He stepped around the desk. He did not touch me. I loved him for that, and also wanted to shake the walls down to get to him. He closed the door halfway, not enough to break the rules we'd set, just enough to quiet the hallway. For a second, everything slowed. The plant on his shelf seemed to lean in. The light found the silver in his hair and made it almost white. "Dinner," he said, voice hushed like in church. "My place, Friday, I'll cook. I'll try not to overdo the rosemary. I'll bring dessert," I said. "I'll try not to eat it on the way." We almost shook hands then, like gentlemen in the old movies who could not say what they wanted to say in public. Instead, he put his hand over his heart in a gesture that started as a joke and ended as all seriousness. I mirrored him without thinking. We looked like we were pledging allegiance to something only we could see. People think the moment the obstacle clears, the feeling wins like a horse at a race, and the music swells. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it's the way you sit in a meeting and realize you are not counting your heartbeats anymore. Sometimes it's the way lunch tastes like lunch and not like strategy. Sometimes it's the way the city outside your window looks the same and becomes new. The last days on Dorian's team were the kind that make a person proud to have done something well. I had built systems and they worked. I told the new folks where the traps were and how to avoid them. I wrote instructions with the kind of patience I had not granted myself in my 30s. Dorian stood in the doorway of my office twice and told me I was doing a beautiful job. He used the word beautiful like it belonged in a business context and made it true by saying it. Friday morning, I wore a shirt I liked, because the collar didn't try to choke me. I packed a bottle of wine, chosen with the help of a clerk with a voice like a cello, and a bag with apple tarts from the bakery on the corner that smells like butter as soon as the door opens. Work was work, a half day of emails and one last set of notes, and a walk to Sarah's new section to say hello. She had kind eyes and a laugh that started in her belly, and when she shook my hand, she said, "You're Tom," in a way that made me think she wanted me there, not just need me there. It felt like stepping onto a porch you'd been looking at for years. At 5, I left the office by the front door, like a citizen. Outside, the city was evening soft. I walked, because that's what my body knows how to do when it is happy. Dorian's building was a 10-minute stroll through streets that smelled like dinner. I pressed the buzzer and his voice came through it, the same voice I heard in meetings and at my desk and in the memory of a stairwell when the lights dimmed. "Come on up," he said, and the door clicked. He had tidied in the way that people tidy when they are hoping you will stay, candles not lit yet, a blanket folded twice on the back of the couch. The counters wiped, but a smear of flour at the edge, as if to prove that a person lived there. The room smelled like rosemary and lemon, a happy marriage. He wore a sweater I wanted to touch. He looked at me, and whatever carefulness we'd carried like a tray for weeks did not fall. We set it down. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said. We were both smiling, and neither of us was hurried. He took the bag of tarts and the wine and put them on the counter. Then he said, "Wait," as if he remembered something, and his face went serious. "What?" I said, step half taken. He pointed to the refrigerator. "I need to show you something before we eat." Full transparency. He was teasing. He was not teasing. My heart thudded once, a warning and a reminder. He opened the refrigerator and took out a small Tupperware, held it like a precious artifact, and passed it to me. Inside was a lumpy stew of indeterminate origin. "I tried to make a bean thing," he said. "It's terrible. Historically terrible. I need you to know this in case you ever ask me to feed you without supervision." I laughed so hard, my knees went weak. He watched me as if I were a sunrise. "Noted," I said. "No unsupervised beans." Dinner tasted like Sundays at their best. We ate slowly. We told stories the way people do when they want to give the other person all the paths back to who they were. He told me about a baseball game with his father when he was 9, the way his chest swelled when he got the foul ball, the way that ball had lived on his dresser for years. I told him about the time my daughter convinced me to buy a lemon tree that was not meant for Massachusetts, and how I kept it alive for 2 years too long out of sheer stubborn love. We did not talk about our former marriages with sharpness or apology. We talked about them like rivers we had crossed and respected. When we finished, and the plates were stacked and the tarts were gone, except for one, we decided to save because restraint makes everything taste better. He reached across the table and laid his hand on mine. His palm was warm and dry and present in a way that broke me open and stitched me up at the same time. "There's a thing I need to say," he said. "And if it's too much, tell me to slow down." "I can slow down." "I like slow," I said. "I didn't think I'd get a second life at this," he said. "I thought I'd be good for people at work, and good for my sister, and decent to my neighbors, and that would be enough. I thought maybe I'd flirt with the guy at the bookstore who never understands my taste. I signed up for the charity 5K last fall because I didn't know what else to do with a Saturday. I don't say this to make our story sound like a movie. I say it to tell you that whatever this is, whatever it will be, it is not an accident. We did not trip and fall into it. We chose it. We are choosing it. Sometimes love is less about the declaration and more about the articulation of a promise you didn't know you'd been waiting to make." I lifted his hand to my mouth and pressed a kiss to the place between his thumb and his first finger. It was not a reckless kiss. It was a vow. "I choose it," I said. We moved then in small ways, as if learning a new instrument. He stood and I stood with him. He held my face in his hands and searched me like a map, as if memorizing a route he wanted to be able to take in the dark. He kissed me, and when he did, I felt all the carefulness we'd tended for weeks braid itself into something strong and flexible that would hold. There was nothing rushed in it. It was a kiss that wanted to know how my breath sounded at the end, and whether my shoulders relaxed, and what sort of silence followed. It was a kiss that said we had built this fort with our own hands, and we were safe inside. He pulled back first, not far, just enough to look me in the eye. "Okay?" he asked, still the manager to my person, still the person to my person, all the roles we would always carry in honest light. "Okay," I said. Yes, we did not tumble. We sat on the couch, sides touching, and put on a record that popped in all the right places. He pointed at the ceiling and told me about the leak that had haunted him last winter. I told him about the time I'd thought a raccoon was in my attic, and it turned out to be bad ductwork. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. When it was late enough that tomorrow felt close enough to touch, he walked me to his door and kissed me again. "Careful and real. Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," I said. "The next day." The world did not rearrange itself just because we had. It rained again, and the coffee tasted like a small petition for patience. My new desk under Sarah's watch hummed with the quiet industry of charts and probability. I liked it. I liked the puzzle of it. I liked that I could look down the hall and see Dorian in profile sometimes, and that seeing him did not feel like a test I had to take and pass. People adjusted. They always do. We give ourselves too little credit for how well we can move the furniture of our lives and still find our way in the dark. A few weeks later, our building hosted a blood drive in the conference center. Dorian and I signed up for slots an hour apart, without coordination. When I finished my apple juice and found myself walking past the chairs, he was in one, sleeves rolled, smiling at the phlebotomist as if she were his favorite person. He did that. It's why people looked out for him. The woman taped a cotton ball to his arm, and he winced the way people do when they want to be brave and also honest. "You always go to these?" I asked later, as we passed by the table laden with granola bars. "Since college," he said. "My roommate broke his leg sophomore year. Saw a lot of hospitals. Makes you want to be useful." We stood by the elevator bank in that neutral area where the building is no one's home and everyone's. A man carrying a box of photocopy paper walked by and nodded like we were fixtures. The light was good there. It made everyone look like they'd slept well. Dorian reached a finger to adjust the edge of the tape on his arm, then let his hand drop and looked at me with the kind of interest that is not predatory or possessive but precise. He loved people by paying attention. It was a joy to be the recipient of that. "Come over Wednesday," he said. "I keep thinking about those apple tarts. We could try to reverse engineer them, or we could just bake something else and call it an homage." "Homage," I said, smiling. "I'll bring the butter, the good stuff." That's how it went. We moved in days and meals and weather. We learned that we both hummed when we were thinking hard. We learned that I liked to leave cabinet doors open like a menace, and he liked to close them with theatrical sighs. We learned that my hands could find his in the night, and that neither of us would pull away. We learned that we could disagree like adults and come back together with grace. Once, after a long Wednesday that had frayed us both to ribbons, we snapped at each other over whether to add salt to the cake batter. And we caught ourselves and we laughed and then we kissed. And the cake rose in the oven like forgiveness. Suspense did not leave us just because love arrived. Life has its own ideas about plot. A quarter later, a critical client threatened to walk. The kind of walk that could pull the rug out from under a lot of chairs. Dorian came home one night with his shoulders tight and his jaw working and sat at my table and said, "I feel like I am being asked to be God and not just a man." "You are a man," I said. "And a good one." Which is often better than a god in my experience. We talked through the numbers and the options and the reality that sometimes the best thing to do is walk away first. He took notes without trying to make me feel useful. He did not need strategic counsel from me. He needed the anchor of my presence, and I could provide that better than any memo. When he left, he kissed my forehead in the hallway and whispered, "Thank you for being the place where I can put this down." My chest felt full for hours afterward. The client stayed. Barely, and afterward, he and I stood at the window of his office with our shoulders touching and watched the city reassert its usual rhythm. He slid a hand into mine for exactly 5 beats, then let go. Not because he was afraid of being seen, but because the letting go itself was an act of the care we had promised. I had learned to love that about us, the way we chose what to hold and what to release with intention. Spring came. The river shrugged off its grey. The maple outside my apartment went tender green. I learned the names of Sarah's twins from the drawings they made me on post-its, and Dorian learned the name of my landlord's elderly dog who walked like a poet. We began to gather artifacts of a life together, a pair of mugs that only made sense in each other's company, a blanket we bought on a weekend trip to a town where no one needed to know our names, a habit of standing on the sidewalk after shows and deciding whether we liked the ending. Sometimes we didn't, and we'd script our own and make each other laugh. In my quietest moments, I felt grateful down to the soles of my feet that we had not been careless. We had earned the ease of moving through a room and knowing where the other would be. One evening in late May, as twilight slid down the side of the building and the street below grew brighter with the first summer nights, we sat on his couch with our legs tangled and a bowl of cherries between us. He picked one up by the stem and held it to my mouth. "You know," he said, "there's a thing I haven't told you. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. And now I do." I took the cherry and waited. When I was 35, I fell in love with a man who made me feel young, he said. He wasn't good for me. He was dazzling and impossible, and he wanted me to be something I couldn't sustain. It didn't end well. It made me cautious. "Maybe too cautious." "You're not too cautious," I said. "You're kind." He looked away, out the window where someone on the street below was laughing. "When you walked into my office the first week and sat down and didn't look away when I spoke, some people do. When I get like that, I thought, if I were a different man, I would fall for him. And then I spent a long time pretending I didn't have to decide what kind of man I was. It took you saying you couldn't pretend to make me stop pretending." The softness in his voice traveled through me like a light through water. "We chose," I said. "We did," he said. "I needed you to know that you didn't just happen to me. I picked you. I pick you." He said it like a sentence he wanted to be the last line of a book. And I let it be, and everything in me exhaled. That week, at the summer party our building throws every year on the terrace, someone put on a Motown playlist, and somewhere between laughter and a bowl of potato salad that was a miracle of dill, Dorian tugged me gently by the hand toward the far edge where the crowd thinned. He set his palm on my shoulder, and I set mine at his waist, and we did an awkward sway that made people smile and not look too long. It was the kind of dance that says to the world, "We're here and you're here and there is room for all of us." On the walk home, We passed a window where a television was showing an old movie no one knows the name of anymore. The couple on the screen was standing in the rain, young and hungry and beautiful. We are not that, I thought with a laugh. We are older and hungrier in our own way, and beautiful in a different language. We walked on. He slipped his fingers through mine. A bus went by, and an older woman at the window smiled at us over her knitting, and I felt seen in a way that prickled behind my eyes. The city made room. We made room. The rain stayed away that night. There were, of course, less cinematic days. Days when the dishwasher broke and flooded his kitchen, and we stood with towels, laughing in the sort of way that threads humor through annoyance. Days when my mother called and didn't know who I was for a minute, and he sat with me on his steps and held my hand while I remembered how to breathe through that particular ache. Days when a meeting went sideways and I had to remind myself that a sideways meeting is not a sideways life. In all of them, the through line was a steadiness I had not known I could have. Not because life had steadied, but because love had. One night, late in the summer, I woke to the sound of thunder so far away it might have been the earth turning. Dorian was asleep on his back beside me, mouth slightly open, the way some people sleep when they trust the room. I propped myself on an elbow and watched him for a long time. That small permission, private and precious. The lightning rolled a whisper across the window, and for a moment I saw us like a photograph taken from above, two men in the middle of their lives. A room, a plant that still leaned toward the sun. A blanket we'd kicked to the floor, the gentle mess of being alive. The storm in the distance made no threats. I reached out and put my hand flat against his chest, where his heartbeat met my palm. It was steady. He stirred and opened his eyes and smiled in that way people do when they wake to something good and surprising. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said. "It's storming somewhere." He took my hand in his and guided it down between us, where our fingers could rest in the crease of the quilt, as if there were an old prayer written there. "We're okay here," he said. "We are okay here." It is a sentence that belongs to my life now. When I sit at my desk and build a model that makes sense of a messy set of numbers, when I open the refrigerator and there is a Tupperware of something that did not go wrong, when I pick up the phone and my daughter says, "Dad," in a way that holds both our ages, when I walk past the office of the man who used to be my manager and is now my love, and he looks up and gives me a small nod that contains a whole conversation, then I know the work we did to get here mattered every once in a while. Late on a Friday, when the office is mostly dark, we'll find ourselves side by side at the window, looking out at the skyline. He'll say, "Remember that first storm?" And I'll say, "The one where we held the line." And he'll smile, and I'll feel the wanting that is not a fire hazard anymore, but a home we built that burns warm and bright. And if you're asking whether I still feel that same wild jolt when he laughs, I do. I hope I always will. It's the sound of a life that got braver and kinder than I expected when I touched the doorframe of his office and decided to walk in. It's the sound of rain easing off and a city deciding it can be gentle. It's the sound of love, honest and careful, built in the open, held with both hands.